Good morning, good morning, good morning, everybody, and happy Monday. Hope everybody had a wonderful and productive weekend and are ready to start the week strong. Today, we're going to be talking about our sky slope checklists. I know that's a hot topic, as most people don't know what are on those checklists until you actually start a sky slope file. And a lot of times you need a little information and background, especially on the purchase or on the listing side, in order to know which documents to get to your clients. And or on the purchase side, when you receive a disclosure package, making sure you have everything you need. So hopefully today will lend a little insight to that and kind of give you the roadmap, if you will, when we share the slide deck of everything that you will need without actually having to start the file, or you'll have it ahead of starting the file, I guess I should say. So with that being said, today is our mastering contract session. So the checklist obviously are all about contracts, documents, and disclosures. So we do that every Monday from 10 to 11. Every Wednesday from 10 to 11, we do mastering transactions. So everything you'll need to know about creating and or completing a transaction. And Fridays, we do mastering your business. So all the insights to laying a good foundation and creating wonderful habits in your business journey in the real estate career. So Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, standing appointments 10 to 11, always on the company Zoom. Outside of, and I will forewarn everybody, Wednesdays, we do use a separate, or excuse me, the last Wednesday of every month, which will be this coming Monday or Wednesday, we do use a different Zoom. And that's because we always attend the commercial class. And we will have a little insights for people new to commercial on this session, rather than completely catering to just the commercial agents. So look forward to seeing everybody there. But outside of the last Wednesday of every month, it is a standing appointment on the company Zoom Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, 10 to 11. For anybody that was on last Wednesday and missed the message, unfortunately, our lending team was out at the UWM event and had at the last minute to cancel our lending session. So we are going to try and reschedule that for next Wednesday, a week from this Wednesday, and stay on track with that. So with all that being said, in addition to the trainings that we're doing Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, we do have a 90-day calendar for agents. This is targeted to newer agents, agents getting back into the business, and or agents who haven't quite got the traction they want. And what we do for 90 days, Monday through Friday, we send you a new task. And the idea is to take the question that a lot of newer agents have in that, what should I be doing today? So we try and take that out of the equation for you. And not only do we tell you what to do today, but we give you all the tools, whether it's a link to a website, a video, a how-to, a step-by-step guide, examples, or anything else that may help you achieve that task. So we tidy that and we put that in a tidy little bundle and we email it to you every morning, again, Monday through Friday for 90 days. The idea is to help build good habits, to build good time management, to build your calendars, to build the foundation that's going to allow you to have a wonderful 2026 and obviously a great start to your real estate careers. So if that is something that is of interest to you, and or you've tried and haven't got as far as you like, and or would like to start over, simply put your email address and name into the chat, and we will get you set up today on that 90-day pathway. So for everybody else, again, thank you for your patience as we go through that sort of disclaimer every one of our sessions, but we just want to make sure that everybody's on the same page. So with all that being said, let's get into what we're talking about today, and that is sky slope checklists. So first thing I'm going to do, give me 1 second, I'm going to share my screen, but before I do that, let me get out of here, and in there. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen. And the first thing I'm going to do is go to SkySlope, just so everybody can see where exactly, okay, the checklists are that we are going to be talking about. And again, the slide deck, when we get to it, we'll go through it real briefly. We're going to focus, obviously, like we typically do, mostly on the residential side of things and going through those checklists. But you'll see when we get there, there are a number of different checklists that we have, a number of different types of transaction on both the listing and the purchase side. So we'll see what those are. But again, we're going to focus on the residential side of things because that's probably 95% of our business. Now, if you go to SkySlope, okay, and you click on Manage Listings, all right, I'm just going to go through one real briefly, okay, and we see a Create Listing, okay, so you've gotten all your listing documents signed and you're ready to upload your file to SkySlope, okay. Now, we mentioned the problem is if you've already gone through and got your listing, a lot of times you want to get all the documents signed. So you don't know which documents you need until after you've created this. Now, can you create this file beforehand so you can get the checklist? Absolutely. Okay. But in most cases, people are waiting until after they get their documents signed to upload them. All right. So this is representation on a listing. Okay. Who's the listing agent? We're just going to put in my name in here. Okay, select the property. It doesn't have to be an MLS because it will do a Google search for you. So I'm just going to put in our office here in San Francisco. Okay, so it's starting a file for me. Now, the first thing it'll say once you've started the file is select the checklist type. Okay, so you can see here we have residential listing, commercial and residential income, vacant land, listing, REO, probate, foreclosure, bankruptcy, lease listing, business listing, and commercial lease listing. Okay, so we have 7 different types of files that we can go ahead and create. Okay, now if I was to click on one of those, all right, and just start entering in all the information, all right, I can go ahead and create the SkySlope file, which will eventually get me to our checklist, okay, and all the documents we're going to need. All right, I'm not going to do that right now because we're actually going to look at those in a minute. All right. Now, again, most of the time we are creating these after we've got the listing signed. So we already have our documents that we're going to upload. All right. So the idea about what we're doing today is to give everybody the information ahead of time, okay, and a resource to use in order to create those files, whether you're doing it from SkySlope Forms, whether you're doing it from Zip Forms, or any other third party that you might be using. Okay. So that's on the listing side. All right. Now let's also look at transactions. So if we say manage transactions and we create a transaction, it's very similar. We're going to enter in some real basic information to get the process started. Okay. So we're doing a purchase. Okay. Let's just say it's under contract. I have a signed contract. Again, address, we're just going to use here the address here in our San Francisco office. Okay. So, and again, here we have the opportunity in the listing side, it's at the top of the screen, and the purchase side, it's right in the middle. Select a checklist for the property. Okay. Now, on the purchase side, on the listing side, we have 7 different transactions, and we'll look at those in a minute. Okay. On the purchase side, we actually have 11 different transactions. Okay. So we have residential 5+ units. We have mixed use residential, which is 1 to 4 units. We have our regular residential sale, commercial sale, vacant land sale, residential income sale, REO, probate, foreclosure, bankruptcy, okay, some type of a distress sale, brand new home construction, business purchase, residential lease, okay, or commercial lease. Okay, so on the listing and the transactions, you have options for both purchases and sales, as well as leases on the listing side and or on the tenant side. Okay, so that's how you would access these through SkySlope. And again, typically you are accessing these through SkySlope after you already have the transaction already started. And a lot of times the documents are already filled out and signed. Okay. But what documents do you need to go get filled out and signed? Okay. There isn't a resource, unfortunately, on SkySlope that's readily and easily available to do that. Okay. So what we did is we put it into a nice PowerPoint format, like we do with most of our things. Okay. And again, we will share this PowerPoint with everybody. This PowerPoint actually is pre the forms revision. Okay. So we will be updating this probably in the next several months, and obviously, again, ahead of the new forms revisions in December, so that we keep everybody up to date. So some of the new forms revisions aren't necessarily reflected in here, but for the most part, it is everything that you will need. Okay, so let me go ahead and make this a little bit bigger and we'll dive into it. Okay, so this is just, again, a reference guide. So this will give you kind of the play-by-play on what you will need, all right, in order to put together your listing contracts and disclosures, as well as your purchase contract, and review what you've received to see if you've gotten all the disclosures that we require and you may need, okay? So again, as I mentioned, we will always put these into the chat afterwards, so you can take this and use this as, you know, your checklist or your guidebook. So as we mentioned, on the listing side, okay, there are 7 different checklists that we have set up in SkySlope, and our compliance team does a great job of constantly updating these to make sure that everything that you need, we need is to make the transaction in compliant is listed in there. Okay, so you can see we have 7 different checklists: residential listing, okay, and these all match what we just saw in SkySlope. Commercial and residential income listings, vacant land listing, REO, probate, foreclosure, bankruptcy, so a distress listing, lease listing, business listing, and commercial lease. So when we talk about number 5, the lease listing, obviously that would be residential. Okay, and number 7, commercial lease, obviously is commercial. Now, on the right-hand side of that checklist, tells you how many things are in that checklist. Okay, so on a residential listing, there are 26 items listed. Okay, now this is just on the listing side. Now, just because you have the listing, okay, once it goes into a transaction, that's going to create a whole new checklist and a whole new set of documents. These are just the things that are for the listing, assuming that there is no purchase contract, there is no ratified deal, there is no imminent sale. Okay, this is just on the listing side. Okay, so residential listing, 26 items. Commercial and residential income, 25. Vacant land, 22. Listing REO. Probate, foreclosure, bankruptcy, 25. Lease, 16. Business, 20. Commercial lease, 14. Okay, so obviously the leases have a lot less documentation than the listings or the sales, I should say. Okay, but you can see somewhere between 20 and 26 items, okay, are needed. Okay, now all of these aren't necessarily required per se, all right, but there are 26 items that may be needed for that listing transaction. And again, just on the listing side of things. Once you ratify a deal, then it goes to a purchase transaction, okay? And again, a whole new checklist is going to pop up, okay? So that purchase transaction, and we'll talk about that in a little while, is a lot of times what you're going to use as your checklist when checking the disclosures that you need your seller to fill out, sign, and send back to you. Okay, so on the listing side, we're just talking about the documents that we need for a listing. Okay, so first one we're going to talk about is commercial, even though residential listing is at the top. We're going to say that one for the last because that's the one we're going to focus on the most. Okay, so you can see here 25 items for the commercial or residential income. Okay, anything from comments to the actual listing agreement, representative capacity, as well as miscellaneous documents if there were any offers that were rejected and not ratified, and or if we ever cancel a listing. Okay, now obviously some of these things won't apply, okay, and will never apply because, again, you may not have any rejected offers. You may never cancel this listing, okay? So obviously those things aren't necessarily going to be required, all right? When we talk about vacant land listing, again, very similar, all right? Comments, listing agreement, any addendums, okay? You can see here an addendum is conditional because there may not be an addendum on your listing. However, the listing agreement, agency relationship, multiple listing service addendum, vacant land advisory, these are all things that are required. So you can see things with the little box that say required are required. The ones with the stars is they may apply, okay, in certain situations. All right. Now, one thing to note is even though something is required, okay, that's in a general sense. There's always exceptions to that rule, meaning that, oops, let's go back to MLS printout, okay, on your listing, it may never go into MLS, in which case you're not going to have an MLS printout. And if that's the case, we need some sort of a note and or the exclusion, and you can simply upload your exclusion to MLS where the active printout goes. Okay, so even though some things are required, they may not always apply. There may be an exception. And if there's an exception, we simply put whatever we think the exception is into our notes in SkySlope, and or we upload a documentation that would show why it should be exempt or an exception. Okay, doesn't always mean that that's going to fly. Okay, we all know that Jan and her team are extremely, extremely thorough, okay, and are doing everything they can to protect your interest, our interest, as well as the client's interest. Okay, so just because we think something is exempt and or should have an exception doesn't always mean that it will. Okay, but that's something that may open up a topic of conversation. Okay, so if we've got distress sales, okay, again, you can see what's required, what's not, or what is conditional. All right, we're not going to go through line by line every single one. We got vacant land, we've got the REOs, we've got leases. Okay, now again, the leases are going to have a lot fewer items that are required. Okay, obviously, we're still going to need a lease listing agreement, agency relationship, compensation, fair housing, consumer residential owner advisory and residential owner disclosure. Okay. Now, there's also a number of other things in terms of the owner intake form, just cause eviction addendum, which is required, representative capacity, should there be representative capacity, active printouts, multiple listing service addendum, so on and so forth. Okay. So you can see leases have a lot fewer items than actual sales. All right. Business listings. Okay. There's not a lot in business listings outside of the listing agreement that's going to be required, as well as on commercial leases. All right. But when we get to the residential listing, this is one we kind of want to focus on. All right. So transaction comments. Okay. Well, we may not have any comments. Now, one thing to note is that it's going to be extremely, extremely hard, okay, to remember every conversation that you had, everything that you did, all the in-person meetings, okay, or telephone chats that you had with clients or agents or anybody else for that matter. So it's extremely, extremely important if you don't have documentation, meaning email and or text, okay, or something in writing from any of the parties, that you make comments, okay? And the best way to do that is simply to follow up emails, okay? Now you can make comments directly into your SkySlope file. Agents who've been around for a few decades will still make notes, okay, on the front of their actual physical file, okay? In the old days, you used to have basically right on the front of the files, okay, that we used to use is before they were digitized, okay, you would have a place to make notes, okay, and every conversation you had, you would document, okay. Once things started being digitized, we got away from that, okay, and now we are noticing that it is becoming more and more of an issue, especially on transactions that have some type of a dispute to them, okay, where agents are going back and saying, well, we talked about that in person, or we had a phone conversation, or that's not what I meant, okay, or they didn't understand me. So it's important, okay, and what a wonderful problem to have, to take an extra few minutes after every conversation to make some notes or to send a follow-up email saying, hey, here's what we talked about. What a wonderful problem to have, to never have to use that, okay, because if you have to go back and use that, it usually means there's a problem. Okay, so even though transaction comments, okay, is listed here as something that is conditional, not necessarily required, okay, we strongly suggest, okay, taking advantage of putting all of your communications into your SkySalt file. Okay, that way, a year, 2 years, 3 years, okay, if something is considered fraud, there is no statute of limitations on that. Okay, the statute of limitations starts when the fraud is actually found or alleged to be found. Okay, so you can have a deal from 5 or 10 years ago where all of a sudden you're coming back having to remember about it. Okay, and again, what a wonderful problem to have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of transactions that you've done in between, okay, and simply just can't remember all the details. Okay, however, if we've done a great job of transcribing and or following up or adding comments, again, to every conversation, to every interaction, okay, everything that we need will be at our fingertips. Okay, now obviously the exclusive listing agreement is going to be required. We talked about on a previous one an addendum, okay, may not. Okay, you don't really see a whole lot of addendums, modification of terms, things of that sort on listings, okay, unless you're changing a price or extending or, you know, there's some other circumstance that you are changing. All right. However, agency relationship is always going to be required. Okay, the MLS printout, assuming that there is an MLS printout. We talked about this on a previous one. If there's not, all right, well, we're going to upload an exclusion and or we're going to put some sort of an explanation into the line item for MLS printout. Okay, MLS addendum, all right, that's part of our listing package, seller advisory, part of our package, broker compensation advisory. So even though all of these, it seems like a lot of different items, most of all of this is included in your standardized listing agreement, okay, RLA. All right. So again, it's, you know, 8 different items, but all 8 of those are in the listing package. Okay. But we do have to have separate line items for them. Okay. Now, if the property is subject to defensible space and fire hardening, obviously we're going to need that document. The natural hazard disclosures report is required on almost all transactions. So obviously that's going to be required. Representative capacity, again, only if somebody is signing on behalf of an entity. All right. If it's a trust and or a probate, there's going to be additional advisories. If there's a trust, court confirmation or death certificates, those need to be uploaded. If there is additional agent or additional broker, that needs to be uploaded. Okay. If there is a contingency for the seller finding a replacement property, obviously we're going to upload that. All right. Property profile. So this is something whether it's taken from, you know, in the old days, we would always contact our title company and get a profile ahead of going on a listing agreement. All right, now we're typically just pulling the tax records from our MLS, okay, or Realist. All right, so we need one of those to be uploaded with some basic key information about the property and the seller themselves. All right, now if there's going to be a key, say for lockbox addendum, you're going to add a modification of terms, referral fee agreement, any miscellaneous documents, much like we talked about on a previous listing, rejected offers and or cancellation. Now, rejected offers, the reason that goes in with the listings is because, you know, unfortunately, you may never ratify an offer, in which case this never actually goes to the transaction state. Okay, so if that's the case, we still need to keep all of our listing documents together. So any rejected offer would go here. All right, now when we get to our listing or our purchases, okay, there's also going to be a rejected offer section. And frequently, our agents aren't using those. Okay. We would highly suggest and recommend, okay, any offer that you get gets into SkySlope. Okay. Even if it's just under rejected offers. Okay. Because again, you may have a situation where you have to go back and dig up old documentation. Okay. And sometimes email servers crash, or you may not use email anymore, or you've switched emails or whatever it might be, and you may not have access, okay, to an old transaction that you just decided that you were just going to keep everything in your email. Okay. So any offer that you receive should go into SkySlope somewhere. Okay. And even if the again, purchase never ratifies, okay, and the listing expires and or is canceled, you have everything in the same spot you can refer back to. And sometimes, okay, we get requests, whether it's from the DRE and or from an attorney because there's a lawsuit or something of that sort, on transactions that never closed, okay, on offers that were never accepted, okay, where there's a dispute of a disgruntled buyer or somebody that they think there's some type of discrimination or something of that sort, okay. So we are required to provide all of that documentation, provided that it comes with a court order, okay. So highly recommend anytime you get an offer, whether it's accepted or not, it goes into your SkySlope file. And again, if you've got a listing before it's ratified and any offers get rejected, this is where they would live. Okay. So on the listing side, okay, you can see just as a quick peek, okay, there are a lot less documents that are required. Okay. Obviously, we don't need or don't have to have all of the required disclosures for the file yet. Okay, that doesn't mean that we don't have to have our seller sign them and present them to the buyer ahead of time. Okay, before, and I guess they don't technically aren't required to be provided ahead of ratifying an offer. Okay, but they are required for actually closing a transaction. So you'll see on the purchase side, okay, in addition to all the contractual items, there's going to be a lot of disclosure items as well. And that's why there's so many documents in the purchase side as opposed to the listing side. Okay. We also have a number of more actual checklists on the purchase side than we did on the listing side. So you can see here we had 11. On the purchase side, there was only 7. All right. But we have a business purchase, commercial lease, commercial sale, mixed use sale, new home sale, residential 5+, residential income, residential lease, residential sale, and obviously this is the one that we're talking about in most cases, REO, probate foreclosure, so distressed, and then vacant land. Okay, now you can see here on the actual listing side, we had somewhere between 20 and 25 or 26 requirements. Okay, you can see here on the residential sale, all right, there are 97 different documents that we could have. Okay, and that's just what we have on the checklist. Okay, now there could be unlimited amounts of more documents, you know, depending on the area, the city, the county, the municipality, the type of transaction. Okay, so it can even be more than that, you know, some that we haven't even considered. And some that are consolidated into just one category. And you can also have, you know, an unlimited amount of inspections that the seller or the buyer decide to do, okay, outside of your normal ones. So again, these files can grow to well over 100 different documents. And we also know that those documents are multiple pages. So in most cases, our transaction files are several hundred pages long. Okay, God forbid it's an actual condo or townhouse that has HOA docs that are in and of themselves hundreds of pages. And, you know, you can have easily 500 pages in a transaction file. Okay, luckily, everything is housed digitally. Okay, and it's not as cumbersome as it used to be. Okay, right before we started, you know, getting into digital and files started becoming increasingly bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, we were having files that were this big. All right. And that was if you only had 1 or 2 offers. Okay. I remember At a previous office I worked at, and this is before we digitized, there was 78 offers on one home. Okay, so we had to keep all 78 offers. Okay, and literally, if you stack them up, they would be on a table. They would be at eye level. Okay, to me, we took pictures of it. It was phenomenal. Okay, but because they weren't digitized, we had to keep all of those files. We had one box. It was a banker's box. That was just one transaction. Okay, so we are very, very lucky that we get to digitize these things, and they are a lot less cumbersome. So let's start looking at some of these transactions. Now, on the listing side of things, it's basically listing documents. Okay, that's what we have. On the purchase side of things, okay, we have several different categories. Okay, and you can see here we have sale documentation, disclosures, reports, closing docs, and then buyer agreement documentation. Okay, so there's going to be different categories set up when you get to a purchase side. Now, the other thing to remember is that every listing, okay, that ends up closing, okay, or every listing that we get a ratified offer on is not only going to have the listing documents, but once you get that ratified offer, it now becomes a transaction file. Okay, so once you go from listing to transaction, it's going to open up, okay, all of these new checklist items and requirements. Okay, so again, we're going to look at predominantly the residential one, but just briefly looking at, we've got the business purchase, we've got the commercial purchase. Okay, again, sale documentation, reports, disclosures, closing docs, buyer agreements. Okay, this one does add miscellaneous documentation. Okay, for all the permits, leases, inventory, if there's going to be inventory, things of that sort. Okay, we've got our commercial lease. Now, much different than on the listing side. Okay, commercial leases on the transaction side have equally amounts of documentation that's needed. Okay, sales documentation, miscellaneous, disclosures, reports, closing docs, and again, buyer agent documentation. Okay, remember, starting this January, okay, we have to have BRBCs on any transaction that we do. Okay, it's not just on the residential side anymore. Commercial sale, again, we've got sale documentation, miscellaneous, disclosures, reports, closing documents, buyer agent documentation, much the same as we've seen on everything else. Okay, mixed use, this is a little bit different, on a lot less documentation, but we still have sales documentation, disclosures, reports, and closing docs. New home, we're on residential 5+, excuse me. Sales, miscellaneous, disclosures, reports, closing docs, buyer agreements. Residential income, much the same. Residential lease, all right. Here we've got the leasing documents, we've got the disclosures, we've got the miscellaneous, and we've got the representation. Distressed sales, again, much the same, sales, miscellaneous, disclosures, reports, closing docs, buyer agreement. Now, even though most of the categories are all the same, in some of the checklists, they are in different orders, but the documentation is still much the same. Vacant land, again, much the same, sales, miscellaneous, disclosures, reports, closing docs, buyer. And then finally, we've got our residential. So this is the one we're actually going to look at a little more in depth. And I know it's a little small to see, but again, we will share this slide deck with everybody. You can have a printout of it and enlarge it if you like. So much like on the listing side, okay, there are required documents, okay, and you can see here, and again, it's a little small, I'm sorry about that, but you can see here it's required REQ and it's in gold. Or it might be conditional, meaning that it may or may not be necessary for this particular transaction. Those are the ones with the stars. Okay, so obviously a purchase agreement, if we're going to have a transaction, we have to have a purchase agreement. All right, addendums, counteroffers. All right, there may not be any addendums or counteroffers. So obviously those ones are conditional. However, if there was any addendum or counteroffer, okay, those need to be included. And we forgot to mention that on the listing side, even though they are conditional, if they exist, okay, we have to have them in the file. All right, that's important to note as well. Okay, even though it's not going to be a requirement and or it's not going to prevent you from closing out the transaction or getting paid or moving on to the next thing. It's important to know that we are going to need some of these things. Now, if, for instance, in our residential purchase agreement, the box is checked, okay, that says there is a counteroffer, all right, then it's going to, our compliance team is going to make it a requirement that we have a counteroffer. Okay, so even though that it's not initially made a requirement, okay, there are things that will trigger, okay, certain documents to then become required. All right, if we have a counteroffer that basically says subject to or includes addendum number one, then again, addendums, even though they're conditional, now become required. All right, if we've got an addendum number two that's uploaded, okay, well, then we're going to need addendum number one, okay, uploaded as well, okay, or an explanation of why there is a two and no one. Okay, as we mentioned, this was put together a month or two ago. It was before the new purchase agreement came out. So here we've got the federal reporting requirement, the FinCEN requirement. All right, that is now part of the purchase agreement, so it's not a standalone form anymore. So that will be updated on our checklist. Okay, representative capacity disclosure. Okay, that can be done in the purchase agreement. So technically, you don't need an external form. All right, but if it wasn't, and we find out later that there is a representative capacity, then again, that becomes required. Agency relationship, buyer inspection advisory, homeowners inspection advisory, wire fraud, possible representation of more than one buyer. Okay, these are all, again, requirements, but they're all part of the purchase agreement package. So again, even though they're separate line items, okay, a lot of these things get knocked out, all right, when we sign our actual purchase agreement. All right. Now, you've got your MLS printout again, all right, and we talked about it earlier. It may not be an MLS. Okay, if it's not an MLS, then we need to make a note and or put in some type of an exclusion. Now, on the purchase side, we may not have access to an exclusion, okay, in which case we simply just have to put in a note, all right, that this was an off-market or not an MLS property. All right. So you can see here we've got if it's an FHA, if there's an additional agent, if there's a septic, if there's a contingency for the buyer's sale, if the seller had a contingency, if the property's tenant occupied, your TOPA documents, all right, and if there's any type of extension and or cancellation of contract. Again, if we ratify, we have to have a SkySlope file, regardless if it closes or not, okay, because we need to document and house all of those records, okay? So even though this never closes, okay, if it is to cancel, we still need that file and we need all the cancellation documents as well. All right. Now, one thing to note, and this is more of a SkySlope training, but just as a matter of reference, in order to move on to a transaction, if you have a listing, okay, in order to, when you ratify a deal, in order to open up these checklists and move it to a ratified transaction checklist, okay, you have to complete your listing checklist. Okay, everything needs to be uploaded in the required sections, or else it won't even give you the option, okay, of opening up the transaction checklist. So keep that in mind. You don't do a separate one, and that's where people usually think they have a workaround. Okay, they aren't able to convert their listing to a transaction, so they just open a new transaction file. Okay, and now they've got two things. They got a listing and a transaction. That's not how you do it. Once you've completed the listing checklist, it will give you the option, okay, of going to a transaction. Okay. So miscellaneous documents, okay. Now, obviously, these show required, but they may not apply. Okay. Notices to perform and or demands to close, okay, only happen, okay, if we get to that certain point. All right. If they don't, again, a simple note saying there are no notices or no demands, and you are good to go. All right. On the disclosure side, this is probably the one that's most important in terms of putting your actual documentation together for the seller and or reviewing what you've received in the disclosure package to make sure that it fits with all of the documents that we need or are required for our transactions. Okay. Obviously, the AVIDs, transfer disclosure statements, property questionnaires, okay, our affiliated business disclosure statement, okay. Most of these things are in CAR, okay. Some of them, like the master's affiliated business disclosure, you'll need to get that through SkySlope if you don't have a copy of it. Okay, market condition advisory, statewide, supplemental tax, water conserving plumbing, wildfire disclosure. Okay, so those are things that we need to have our seller sign as part of our disclosure package, and or need to make sure when we're reviewing the buyer's package that we receive that it's got these documents. Okay, now there are a number of things that may not apply. Okay, buyer inspection elections. Okay, HOA advisory, fire hardening, lead-based paint. Okay, now if the property is built prior to 1978, this becomes required. Okay, if there are any local area disclosures, okay, if you're in San Francisco, you have to have energy and water conservation. You have to have a 3R report. Okay, so there are local area disclosures that need to be made. All right, square footage, solar, water heater, smoke detector, a lot of these things are optional. Okay, if you don't have a transfer disclosure statement, okay, you may need that water heater statement. Okay, because in the transfer disclosure statement, water heater and smoke detector are covered. All right, but if the property is exempt from transfer disclosure statement, you're going to need a separate water heater. Okay, so there's some things, again, like we talked about on the sale side, there are some things that will get triggered, making others required. Okay, but in a lot of cases, they are conditional. Okay, now again, just because they're conditional, when they get triggered, now they can become required. Okay, under reports, contingency removals. Okay, every file, and we talked about this when we were doing our new forms training. Okay, not every file will have partial contingency removals. Okay, but every single file should have a full removal. Now, that full removal could come with the offer when it's presented. Okay, if you're in a super competitive situation like we hear on San Francisco, most of the offers that we receive come with a full contingency removal. Okay, that's unfortunately the only way buyers are going to get their offers accepted up here. Other times, buyers may remove a loan or an appraisal, then a loan, then an investigation, and then finally everything. Okay, but every single closing that we have should have a full contingency removal. Okay, do they all? No, but they should. Okay. Again, if the property was built prior to 1960, much like on the lead prior to 78, if it's built prior to 1960, we need an earthquake hazards report filled out by the seller. Okay, the environmental hazard, physical inspection waiver. Okay, those are two things that we require. Natural hazard disclosure report. Okay, again, required by the state of California. Receipt being signed, required. Okay, termite report or buyer inspection waiver. All right, now those, even though it says required, that's required on our side of the transaction. Meaning, if it's our buyer, we want them to either have one or sign a waiver. Okay, on the listing side, we can request that, okay, from the buyer, but we may not always get it. So always remember, we can't force anybody to sign or to provide anything that we request. All we can do is our due diligence, okay, to make sure that we are requesting it, okay, and we're documenting that we're requesting it, okay. So in a lot of times, and we see this a lot from co-brokers, okay, when we ask for the reports that they had done and they say we didn't do any, and we say, well, can we get an inspection waiver? No, we're not going to provide that. Okay, well, we can't force them to provide that. Okay, it's not our transaction to hold up because of that. All we can do is document. So the text, the email, okay, something that shows that they are not going to provide that to us. And we simply upload that to our SkySlope file. And in most cases, that will satisfy our requirements. Okay. And it's the same for all other disclosures, especially when we've got internal disclosures that we may require for our agents and our clients, okay, but aren't necessarily required by any state, local ordinance, anything of that sort, okay. But things like preliminary title report, okay, those are definitely required, okay. Sewer laterals, okay, again, city-specific advisories, disclosures, or reports. If it is in a city, so San Francisco, okay, we are required to have a 3R report, okay. So even though that's not required on here, okay, it does become required because it is a requirement for the city of San Francisco, okay. So a lot of places have sewer laterals. Not only do they have the scans that are required, but the retrofit certificate as well. So again, even though those are conditional, they may become required depending on where the property is. Okay. And then we've got our closing documents. Obviously, our final closing statement from title, MLS print sold. Again, if the property is not an MLS, not a lot we can do about that. All right. And or if we are on the purchase side of things, okay, the listing side may not be as diligent as we are and marking that sold in a timely fashion. Okay. All we can do is request that they do it. We can actually follow up with our MLS and ask them to make that happen. But a lot of times we can't get that before it actually comes time to close out our file and or get paid. So a simple note is all we need, showing that, hey, we've made the request that they mark it sold. They haven't done so. There's not a lot we can do. Okay. Escrow instructions, commission instructions, broker demand. In most cases, even though these are two separate items on the checklist, in most cases, those are the same form. Okay. So if you simply upload that same form to both spots, you will fulfill your requirement. Okay. 17th page of the RPA signed by all parties, meaning agents and escrow. Home warranty, if there's one, or the waiver. Now, obviously, the waiver a lot of times is part of the contract. So all we're doing is just uploading that one page that shows the waiver, the buyer's waiving their home warranty. Okay, preliminary title receipt, FERPTA, and or qualified substitute, verification of property condition. Now, again, this is another one that a lot of agents, and I say agents because a lot of times they don't make their clients aware that they should be doing a final walkthrough. And they just want to get through the closing, get done with the process. So a lot of times they're going to forego this. Okay. So again, if we're on the listing side, we want to make sure we're giving them ample opportunity, giving them ample request to do it if they choose not to and or not to give us the form. Well, at least we've done our due diligence in trying to make sure that happens. All right. Again, conversations, email, text logs. This is extremely, extremely important, as we talked about when we were talking about the listing. Okay. You don't want to have to go back several months, years, even decades later, trying to remember everything that happened in a transaction. Okay. If you upload everything to your file at the time that you are doing it, all right, it's going to save you so much aggravation, so much work, so much headache in the future if and when a situation arises. And when I say if and when, because it's not usually a case of if, it's when. There's an old saying in real estate: if you haven't had a transaction fall out of escrow, okay, or cancel, and you haven't been sued, that just means you haven't sold enough real estate. Okay, because unfortunately, it's one of those inevitables. All right. And the beauty of having SkySlope file, okay, is that every single transaction, whether it's a listing or a purchase, okay, no matter what type of file checklist we're using, every single transaction on SkySlope has its own unique email address. Okay, so as a matter of good practice from the start, okay, I don't care if you've done no deals, you've done one deal, you've done 1,000 deals. Starting today, make it part of your habit, okay, that every email you send or receive, okay, for a particular transaction, you CC to your SkySlope file. Okay, this will mean you will never have to go back and search emails. This will mean you'll never have to go back and try and remember conversations. Okay, everything will be housed in the file. Okay, so many times we see when we have to provide documents of a file. Okay, we have everything in terms of the checklist, all right, in SkySlope. It's easy, and it literally takes seconds to pull up and to send a link. Okay, but now we got to go back to the agent and say, hey, we need all of your emails, we need all of your contacts, we need all your conversations and text logs. Okay, and it takes that agent weeks to go back and go through everything, okay, and put it all together. All right, as long as from today going forward, okay, you document every single correspondence that you have to that SkySlope email address, you will never have to worry about any of that. Okay. And then the last thing, we talked about this in the listing side. Anytime you have a rejected offer, get it into SkySlope. Okay. Don't just keep it in an email. Don't keep a printed copy in the bottom of your drawer. You know, it's one of those that you will never remember. Okay. All of these things. And that's our hope. Okay. That you're going to be doing so many transactions. There's no way you can remember all of the offers that you receive, accepted and or rejected. Okay. So get them into SkySlope. All right. Now, I know I say this all the time, but this definitely is a lot of information in a very, very short amount of time. So I am going to put that slide deck into the chat. But while I'm doing that, who's got questions? I do see one thing in the chat. I noticed the listing checklist requires an NHD report. You usually request the NHD when offer is accepted. Is there a way to work around that? Yeah, you can simply say, you know, put in your notes, NHD to be ordered upon ratification of transaction. Now, one thing to note, especially if you're using property ID doesn't charge for NHDs, okay, until you close. If you don't close, you don't pay for it. So I don't know why you wouldn't order an NHD and include that as part of your disclosure package. Because remember, if you have a disclosure package, you give it to the buyer, they sign off on it,